This is another iRaw podcast. We podcast to make the world a better place for animals.
This is the Talking Animal Law podcast, brought to you by the UK Centre for Animal Law and hosted by Paula Sparks, Director of A-Law. But it's not just for lawyers, it's for anyone who cares about animals. So no matter who you are, if you want to know more about animal protection, news, ethics and animal law reform, then this is the podcast for you.
Welcome to the Talking Animal Law podcast. I'm Alison Burns, and it is my very special honour to be the guest host of this episode. It has a particular Scottish dimension today, as I'll be speaking with Kirsty Jenkins from OneKind. It's a Scottish charity with a long history of making positive change for animals through high-profile campaigns, lobbying the government of the day, conducting important investigations and education concerning the treatment and protection of animals. Kirsty Jenkins holds a Master's in Science in Animal Behaviour and Welfare and has an incredible background working with horses. That work has seen her train and rehabilitate traumatised horses, as well as passing on her valuable knowledge by teaching us humans about horse psychology. Kirsty took up the role of Policy Officer at OneKind in 2020, and I am delighted to welcome you, Kirsty, to talk about the work that you do at OneKind. In today's episode, we'll talk about the Wildlife Management and Muirburn Scotland Bill, recently passed by the Scottish Parliament, as well as OneKind's Stand Up for Pigs campaign, and the National Good Food Nation Plan consultation. Kirsty Jenkins, welcome to Talking Animal Law.
Thank you very much, Alison. It's lovely to be speaking with you, and thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. I just thought we could maybe just start off by talking about what the work at OneKind does, what your work at OneKind is, and all about that organisation and your role. What does your role look like as a policy officer on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, of course. So the organisation was actually founded in 1911 as the Scottish Society for the Prevention of Vivisection by a small group of women who were concerned about that issue. And the organisation's gone from strength to strength, really. Has had a couple of name changes along the way. We are now OneKind. We now work to protect and improve the lives of all different kinds of animals in Scotland. And we do that through, as you say, through campaigns and lobbying, mainly the Scottish Government and Parliament. So as policy officer, I work to inform politicians and civil servants of the animal welfare issues and to make the case for them to make changes to legislations and policies. So I write a lot of briefings and consultation responses and other documents. I work to strengthen bills as they pass through Parliament. I meet with ministers, MSPs and officials. I also need to make sure that I stay well informed about current and emerging issues and the latest developments in animal welfare research. One of the things I really like about the animal welfare movement is that it's really collaborative. And we're in quite a few coalitions, and I represent us in those coalition meetings and working groups. So I mean, it's maybe a bit of a cliche, but every day is different, basically.
Yeah, but I would imagine that it's a very interesting job in relation to, like you said, you've got to keep ahead of the issues that are actually happening. So how do you find out about those issues? Do people get in touch with you, or is it just like you've got ears on the ground?
A bit of that and various things. So yeah, part of it is, like I say, that collaborative aspect of staying in touch with other organisations and also academics and others to keep informed of what everyone else is thinking about. There's definitely keeping across the research. And also there's a bit of sort of horizon scanning of looking to other countries, looking at what's happening elsewhere in the world. And we do investigations, we get alerted to things by supporters. So the information, yeah, it comes from a whole range of sources, really.
That's great. And it's great that you've got an international aspect to what you do as well, because, you know, what we see happening in other countries, sometimes we can, you know, it feels, you know, everything could be just very Scottish centric. But if you're looking outside our borders in relation to what other countries are doing, and maybe we'll touch on that when we talk about some of the other things that we're going to talk about. So there are many campaigns that OneKind has championed over the years. Can you tell me something about those successes to date and what your main campaigns are for 2024?
Yes, I mean, as you say, we do work across a wide range of issues. So some previous successes have been bans on fox hunting, seal shooting, wild animals in circuses. A few years ago, we managed to end the mass culling of mountain hares. We've also worked towards the introduction of CCTV in all slaughterhouses in Scotland. Very recently, in the Wildlife Management and Muirburn Bill, which you previously mentioned, and I think we'll talk about a little bit more, that has just passed, and that will introduce a ban on glue traps and snares. And those are both things we've been working towards for years. So it's quite a recent success there.
I mean, that's been a long time you've been working on that one, isn't it? It's been decades you've been campaigning on that one.
Yeah, I mean, especially snares, absolutely. And I have to really give credit to the many people who were working on it long before I came on the scene, both within OneKind and other organisations. It's been a really a big, long campaign, and yeah, all credit to those people who worked tirelessly for years. So we're delighted. In terms of this year, you asked about.
Yes.
We will be doing quite a lot of work around farmed animals, and again, we're going to talk about that today. We have a coalition campaign we're coordinating to end greyhound racing in Scotland.
Yeah.
And the other thing we're going to do quite a lot on this year, I think, is we're starting some new work around exotic pets. So, yeah, as you said, a wide range of issues we're always working on.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the greyhound racing, because I think am I right in saying that there's still one racetrack in Scotland that's still racing greyhounds? Am I correct in saying that?
That's right. There is only one currently, and it's an unlicensed track. So we have huge concerns about that. But it's a very small feeding industry in Scotland anyway, and we think just due to the animal welfare concerns that it's time to end that practice.
Yeah, be good to close a chapter on that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we mentioned as well that the Wildlife Management and Muirburn Scotland Bill, which is just passed by the Scottish Parliament. So what within that bill, which is fantastic news, what are the key wins for animals with the passing of this bill?
Well, the key wins we've already mentioned, those bans on snares and glue traps. I mean, both of those types of traps just cause unimaginable suffering to any animal caught in them. So the fact that they're going to be banned is huge. It's really important. Aside from that, the main purpose of the bill is to introduce licensing of grouse-moor management. Within that, there will be a separate licensing scheme for the use of spring traps and live capture bird traps. So that's something we support, and that will hopefully bring some improvement. I mean, those traps, we have a lot of concerns about those traps. But this will hopefully, regulating it will help somewhat. So that's something that could be positive. The details of that trap licensing weren't in the bill itself. That will come later because Nature Scot will develop that licensing scheme over coming months. And so we hope that there will be stakeholder engagement and that we can continue to try and influence that to make that as robust as possible.
Yeah, I think that would be a positive thing for a bigger engagement in relation to the licensing detail. So you mentioned obviously that licensing scheme, which will be new. What are the further improvements that still need to be campaigned for? That you see that maybe been missed out during this bill?
Well, I mean, around traps, there's certain types of traps that we have a lot of concerns about in certain practices. I mean, I mentioned live capture bird traps, for example. You know, they're going to be regulated, and that might bring some small improvements. But there's certain, you know, we would question the use of that type of trap at all. They use decoy birds, for example. That's what they call the birds who are put in the trap and used to lure in other birds. You know, they're in there for quite extended periods of time, sometimes exposed to the elements. There is a legal requirement to provide them food and water, but it's not always accessible to them. So, you know, there are practices like that we would just like to see ended rather than regulated, basically. So there, you know, there will be ongoing work to do. We would like to see a review of all trapping in Scotland, looking at both the animal welfare impacts and the reasons for their use, because it's quite fragmented and not justifiable often in our mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a step in a positive step in the right direction. So, but work to be done for the future.
Absolutely, yeah. Always more work to be done, but it's definitely, we support this bill. It is definitely it brings many positives. So we are very happy about it.
Yeah, it's a massive achievement. Well done on that front. Yeah, I'm a big fan of pigs, and I campaign for pigs constantly. And I recently noticed that you've launched your Stand Up for Pigs campaign. So can you tell me a bit more about that campaign, and what are the positive changes for pigs that you hope to drive forward?
Well, we would like to see various positive changes for pigs, but this particular campaign is about the use of farrowing crates specifically, and we would want to see an end to the use of farrowing crates. I think that's something that Dr. Stephen McCulloch actually previously spoke about on this podcast, and he described quite eloquently the horrible suffering that farrowing crates cause for the sows who are put in them. And this again is something we have been calling for years. There were a few reasons that we decided that now was a good time to sort of have a renewed push on it. So one reason is that a couple of years ago in the programme for government, the Scottish Government committed to consult on ending the use of all cages, so farrowing crates and also cages for laying hens and game birds. And they haven't done that yet. This year, from what we understand, quite soon, they are going to launch a consultation on phasing out the use of cages for laying hens and game birds. Obviously, we're very happy about that, and we will be completely supportive of that, but they have not included farrowing crates, and so we want to really urge them to do so. And I think the other reason that we thought now was a good time is that the Agriculture and Rural Communities Bill is currently going through Parliament, and the Good Food Nation National Plan is currently being consulted upon. The draft plan is being consulted upon, and both of those could sort of create policy levers that would help the transition away from farrowing crates. So yeah, that's why we decided now we would really raise the profile of this issue and see if we could bring it forward now. So we started in January. We had an exhibition in the Scottish Parliament. We took a life-size replica farrowing crate into Parliament, which was great. It got a lot of attention. It really caught people's eyes. But that was really, it was quite powerful, I think, because it allowed MSPs to really see for themselves, and they could even step inside if they wanted and experience the restriction, because it's such a small space that the sows are kept in. So that's how we began. We also have an ongoing campaign action for people to write emails to the Minister in support of the campaign.
That's brilliant. I mean, what a great visual as well, because I remember seeing that picture of the farrowing crate and thinking, you know, we're speaking about sentient beings here, and just it puts you know, the hard visual against what's actually happening, you know, in on the ground for pigs.
Yeah.
So well done on that front. That's great to be pushing that forward.
Thank you. Yeah. And hopefully we'll get somewhere with it. We'll see.
Yeah, well, just, I mean, it seems to be that whenever a consultation becomes there, and there's an element in there of animal welfare or being able to move the dial in relation to how we can make improvements, there are openings, you know. So like you said, you've kind of got to grab onto them and push in every direction that we can. So you mentioned the Scottish Government obviously launching this National Good Food Nation Plan consultation, and obviously us with humans using animals as food, and it's well documented the impact that animal agriculture has on the environment. It seems that this may be an opportunity to influence how we shape the plan and what we mean by good food through the consultation. Could you start by telling us a bit about what the National Good Food Nation Plan actually is?
Yes, so the Good Food Nation Scotland Act 2022 aimed to realise the vision for Scotland to become a good food nation. And that vision's been around for a while. It was first set out in 2014 and has gone through various iterations in Parliament. And finally, we have this Act. And one of the things that the Act does is require the Scottish Government to produce a national plan. And then subsequently, local authorities and health boards will have to produce their own plans. So it's the draft national plan that's currently being consulted upon. And it's basically, it's a food strategy is what it is. And the aim is that it will work towards that Good Food Nation vision. And then the plan will be reviewed and updated every 5 years.
So, and with that strategy, so obviously, and I read through the consultation questions, and it just seems to be that the language used in it still feels remote in relation to animal welfare, even though it does make mention of animal welfare within it. But things like it's a certain language used still treats animals as is referred to as foodstuff, you know. So how is the strategy relevant to animal welfare?
Well, I mean, I think more broadly, there's increasing recognition that our food systems nationally and globally is broken. And that's why this type of plan is needed. So for me, one of the most pressing issues in the food system is the disconnect between our recognition of animals as sentient beings and the outdated sort of farming practices that continue to cause them to suffer. And as you say, that's reflected quite often in the language of the various policies. Mm-hmm. There are millions of animals being raised and killed as part of the food system. Many of them do suffer greatly, unfortunately, due to how they're currently being bred and kept. And I'm sure listeners are aware of some of our concerns around that. The National Good Food Plan could bring improvements through a whole raft of measures that would require, incentivise and support farmers to raise standards and improve the lives of animals. So, I mean, as you say, it's a bit woolly sometimes. So I'll try and give a couple of examples. So yeah. One example is like one of the barriers for farmers making the type of changes that we would like to see is that it can increase their costs. And, you know, farmers are more broadly are quite under a lot of pressure just now. They're working to very tight margins. So if there's not a way for farmers to recoup these costs, it can make it very difficult for them to want to make the changes that we're suggesting. So a Good Food Nation plan could create a reliable market via shortened supply chains, local food hubs, and public procurement that would then sort of remove that risk and incentivize more farmers to make changes. Mm-hmm. I think public procurement more widely, so we're talking about the food served in schools and hospitals and so on. I really think that should be a real driver for change.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it could be massive, and it should. I mean, in my mind, it should include a lot more plant-based options, and that any remaining meat and dairy should only be from higher welfare systems, and that would like I said, that would incentivize farmers. It would give them a reliable market. And so it would drive a change in that way, but it would also normalize those more ethical food choices. And I think that if that were to happen in the public procurement led the way, the private sector would have to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is, like, I can remember going to a council meeting many years ago and being the only vegan in the room, and there was absolutely nothing there. So it was like blank looks all around when I said, do you have anything that doesn't have meat or dairy involved in it? But it's a different world we're in now, and there's much more awareness. And obviously that awareness also broadens out to thinking about the environmental and climate change impacts of meat consumption. Do you think this strategy adequately tackles those concerns about the environment and climate change through meat consumption?
No is the answer. I mean, one of the stated aims is to tackle the environment and climate impacts of the food system generally, but there's no mention of meat consumption at all. Yeah. And that's true. That's true generally in Scotland. The Scottish Government has previously said that it has no plans to try to reduce meat production or consumption. So, I mean, it does seem like a bit of a blind spot there.
Yeah, as I noticed through the consultation questions that there's a how to measure the outcomes and things like the consumption of the 5 a day fruit and veg, but there was no mention, like you said, of the reduction of meat and how they measure the outcomes. Do you have any thoughts on that, and in terms of how the measurement of these outcomes can be achieved?
Yes, and I mean, having targets and indicators is one of the issues that is under a lot of discussion, and we OneKind is part of the Scottish Food Coalition, so we've done a lot of work with that coalition around the Good Food Nation policies, and one of the things the coalition was really pushing for was for there to be quite concrete and ambitious targets. And then the indicators are the measures to measure whether those targets are being met. And as you say, there are some, but there aren't very many of them. There definitely aren't very many new ones, and there are no outcomes at all directly related to animal welfare, or as you say, to a reduction in meat consumption. So that's definitely a weakness from our perspective.
Yeah. So my first thoughts looking at it was that would it be reasonable to say, well, a good indicator would be like the reduction in slaughter of animals in Scotland, but then, like you said, it needs kind of a help for farmers to move away from animal agriculture, I suppose. But do you think that would be a fair measurement?
So, I mean, I think a reduction in the slaughter of animals is going to be very difficult to have to gain political traction on in Scotland. What we suggested, we did do some work to suggest targets for while the food plan was being developed. We suggested that a target in the first plan, so this plan that we have a draft of now, should be the ending of all cages. So this comes back to what we were previously talking about with the farrowing crates. Now, it became apparent during our discussions that we couldn't have that concrete target in the first plan because the government is required to consult on that type of change, and that there wasn't going to be the time to do so prior to the plan being published. I think sort of longer term, what we have tried to create a vision of is that these subsequent food plans should drive phasing out all intensive animal farming. So that's something that we're trying to, like I say, create that vision. But the plan as it currently is drafted is very cautious, and there aren't, like I say, there are very few concrete targets at all. So I think at this stage, we're just working to at least try and get a direction of travel, and to get some kind of detail and commitment as to what exactly the animal welfare improvements will be, because although animal welfare is mentioned, there's no detail whatsoever.
Yeah, it seems to be quite light on that, isn't it? There's definitely scope there. So obviously, the plan can be more ambitious, but where are the openings that you see to try and make a difference for animals within the consultation? Is there little chinks of light in there that we can actually kind of wedge in into the consultation itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously responding to the consultation, I mean, as many animal welfare voices responding as possible would be brilliant. And we obviously will be submitting a very detailed response, making some of the points that I've already made to you. So I think the main thing would be to try to provide some of those details that are lacking. So as I say, there's no animal welfare targets, there's no baseline measures by which to judge future progress. There's not an indication of direction of travel. The direction of travel is somewhat hinted at. There is a reference to a suite of targets that for the next plan in 5 years, that will be informed by planned consultations. But without knowing what those measures are, we have no way of assessing the level of ambition there or of holding the government to them. So I think, you asked about sort of chinks. I think that one sentence about this possible reference suite of targets for the future, that is something that I would like to try and draw out and ask for more detail on, because that's something that could be positive, but we just don't know, because there's, we don't know what the suite of measures are. So we'll definitely be asking for more detail on that. The other thing,
sorry, on you go. No, I just thought, do you know if there's a timescale on that? Get hearings, when that might become something that they're looking at for input. Targets.
No, exactly, and that's exactly the point. There's very little detail at all. I mean, what I just said is really just one sentence in the plan, that, like I just said to you, that they're working. There's ongoing work on this suite of targets for the next plan, but that is all that it says. So, I mean, I guess if the plan is to introduce them in the next plan in 5 years, they would need to consult on them between now and then, but otherwise there's no detail on when that would be. And as I said, there's no detail on what they would be consulting on. So I think there's a lot of things to pick up on there. I mean, the other thing in the plan that has quite a lot of snapshots of what life in a good food nation would look like in practice. And I think that's to try and make it a bit more tangible for people. So they give these little snapshot boxes. So, for example, what would life be like for a child in a good food nation, or a public caterer in a good food nation? When I read that, what really seemed very striking to me was that the perspective of animals is completely missing. So I think there should be snapshots of the life of a cow or a chicken or a salmon in a good food nation.
Yeah.
And that to me feels like something that, again, we could introduce to this discussion, to really try and drive home the point that all of these animals in the food system also need to be considered. We can't call ourselves a good food nation as long as there are animals suffering in the food system.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we were talking about, seeking different initiatives and looking to other initiatives. Are there any other parallel initiatives for example, in the parts of the UK? I know that there's a Wellbeing of Future Generations in Wales Act. So do you know anything about that? And does that chime well with what the Scottish Government are trying to do?
I don't know much about the Wellbeing of the Future Generations in Wales Act, although from what I've heard, it does seem like a quite sort of forward-thinking initiative. I think probably the similarity between that and the Good Food Nation Act is that both are taking or attempting to take a systems thinking approach, which I think is really important to have that more holistic approach to policy making. So that act is obviously broader than just food. I mean, as far as food goes, Scotland now does have the most comprehensive strategy of any of the UK nations. And I need to keep reminding myself of that because the Good Food Nation vision is actually a really powerful one. There's such opportunity here. Unfortunately, I fear that opportunity is not, is going to be missed. But we are going to keep working to try and make sure that's not the case. I think the other thing that came to mind when you're talking about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is that I think there needs to be more recognition that the well-being of humans and other animals and the natural world are all very inextricably linked.
Absolutely.
And I think that's, again, something that doesn't always come out in these policies. Animal welfare is sort of set aside from other things rather than being embedded into the core of these policies. So, for example, what some of the gravest animal welfare concerns we have are for chickens raised for meat. They get called broilers, which I don't like. So that sector has not historically received subsidies. So the government, I think, needs to find different policy levers to influence it. And I think the Good Food Nation plan should create those. But chicken farming is a really obvious example of the One Health and One Welfare frameworks that say, as I said, that draw on the links between humans and other animals and the natural world. Because chicken farming, I mean, I say farming, but it's these big industrial sheds, and they're harmful to the people who are working in them. They're harmful to the communities nearby, the animals, obviously, and to the natural world. They cause a lot of pollution. We're seeing, you've probably seen in the news, there's a lot around the River Wye down south just now being so polluted from the chicken farms nearby. And so for me, that's the kind of problem that the Good Food Nation plan should be addressing.
Yeah, absolutely. And anything that we could do along the way to achieve that has got to be good as we try and keep pushing from all angles to try and make a difference for animals. It's such horrendous suffering goes on, and I suppose education as well is really important. And I know the consultation makes reference to education, but I just felt that was a bit light as well. So I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think you're completely right. And I think one of the recognitions is that people are quite disconnected with their food. In general, people don't know where their food comes from. They don't know how it's produced. And again, ideally, the Good Food Nation plan will help address that. It will sort of reconnect people to their food. And part of that is education. And I think if that's the case, then that really would help to bring changes for animals, because people don't like to see, I think a lot of people don't know how animals are farmed, but when we do see, for example, undercover exposés of some of the practices, people are quite often horrified. And so I think if it became a lot more transparent as to what farming practices were, there would be much more progress in improving those practices.
Well, we certainly are trying to make sure that we join the dots for everyone in all the things that we do, but what you do at OneKind is incredible. And I'd just like to say, Kirsty, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk animal law with you. Your insights and valued work at OneKind really are at the front of making a difference for animals. I'm so impressed. But if people want to learn more about OneKind and the work that you do there, where's the best place for them to go?
They can go to our website. It's www.onekind.org, and we also are across all of the main social media channels. But if they go to our website, they'll be able to find all of that and our contacts.
That's absolutely brilliant. Kirsty, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. I'm Alison Burns, and I've been talking animal law with Kirsty Jenkins of OneKind. Thank you so much for listening.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening from. And if you give us a good review, it will help others to find us. And don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss a show.
For more information about the work of the UK Centre for Animal Law, please go to www.alaw.org.uk.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.